Heroes of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 155 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 11 of A Storm of Swords, that's Jaime 2.
And as always, we're going to chat about the chapter, we're going to try not to spoil any future plot points for you, and hopefully we're going to provide you some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in a little pedantry, and cover some relevant news and listener correspondence. Be sure to check out the show notes, they'll provide some additional information about the characters and geography of this chapter. Be particularly helpful if you're not reading along, which I understand quite a few of you aren't. Which is reasonable, that's fine. I mean, we're doing the heavy lifting for you. You just ride our coattails, that's fine.
That's right. That was one of the promises we made early on.
Exactly. How are you, Mackelly?
I'm doing just fine. It's been not that long since we last recorded. We're trying to run a little bit ahead.
We are trying to run a little bit ahead. And in between, we had a live session with our sustainers.
We did.
So it's been a non-stop stream.
It has. That's right. You didn't make it to lunch today. I was...
I thought it was tomorrow, but anyway, no.
It was today.
The answer was no.
Our old lunch group from work before everybody went off-site had a lunch today, and Simon did not make it. But, of course, they're always curious about our little podcast that we do here. And one of them asked where we were, what book we were on, and I said we were going to do chapter 11 of A Storm of Swords, which is the third book this evening. And Mark was like, wait, I thought you guys were still on the first book. You're that far? I was like, Mark, we've been doing this for almost 3 years. We were still on book 1. That would be one long book.
So one of the reasons I didn't make it to lunch was because I've been very busy at work. So I had a call today, and I got onto the call 3 minutes early. And the only other guy who was on the call already said, hey, Simon, you know you're hosting this call this week? Have you put together an agenda and content?
Was that the look you had right there that you gave
No,
me?
you better believe. I was scrambling, let me tell you.
You were like, no, I was working on a podcast episode. I don't have time for that.
We never mentioned, so this is Jaime 2, right? And last week was Davos 2.
Right.
And that was the first duplicate of the book.
Yes.
And we never mentioned it. Normally we make a point of mentioning that, and it slipped us by.
We did mention it. We mentioned it after we ended the show. And then we were like, oh,
yes.
As we were...
we talked about it.
We mentioned it to each other. That doesn't count. I don't think that counts.
Oh, so the other topical piece of thing is, of course, that the House of the Dragons has started.
It did. Sure did.
And it was very interesting, very entertaining, which is why we had the live session with our sustainers, because we wanted to talk to them about it, and that was fun as well.
That really was fun. There were some interesting insights that everybody had. I thought that was pretty neat. One thing I mentioned, I meant to mention on the call that instead I mentioned in the Discord community, is that there's a funeral scene, and Rhaenyra calls to her dragon Syrax and says Dracarys. And Syrax breathes fire onto the funeral pyre and, sets that off. And I thought, that's interesting, because just a few chapters ago when we were in Dany 1 of this book, she told Jorah that she came up with Dracarys because it's a High Valyrian word that means dragon fire. She came up with it just as an obscure word so that no one would accidentally say it around her dragons. And I thought, oh, they must not have known that detail and just threw that in there because that's what they would say on Game of Thrones. So Game of Thrones fans would recognize that term. But
what a fascinating piece of pedantry that is.
I had a few pieces of pedantry, but that's the way it goes with TV shows versus books.
Of course, it is possible that they independently came up with the same idea.
It is, yes.
That, in fact, since the time of Aegon, the Targaryens have used Dracarys to get the fires lit.
Dany just stumbled across it.
Stumbled upon the same word, yeah. If it means dragon fire, it's kind of what you might say.
Yes, that is true.
If it was High Valyrian for pineapple, it would be more coincidental.
She maybe should have gone with something like that, just to really throw people off.
Would you like a slice of... No!
No, don't say that. Unless you really like your pineapple burnt. Yeah, it was a good start. Good start to this new show. I thought, and something else that a member of the Discord community mentioned is that it's a much small. It's at least starting off much smaller in scale than a Game of Thrones did, which had people in Winterfell and people in King's Landing and Dany on Essos, and there was different places they could jump around to. Here, they were kind of pretty much confined to King's Landing.
Oh yeah. I thought that, and it's. I mean, the story can grow.
Oh yes, and it will.
Pretty big.
Yeah,
but it's still. I mean, if you think about the writing that George Martin did, I mean, he's written thousands and thousands of pages of what we think of as Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire. This part of Fire and Blood is like a 50-page novella.
Right.
So I mean that the source material for this is way narrower, and of course, it's the intrigue of the whole realm, so it can definitely grow. But at the same time, this is what I said on the chat, that I think it's an opportunity to take the same universe and do a very different kind of show, a much more, philosophical and sort of meditative show.
Sure.
Than Game of Thrones was.
Right. See, these are all the cool, fun things we talk about on our live chat, so you guys should consider joining us.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned before, how informed everybody is. I mean, we really are the voice piece of a community of people who know everything more than we. We're not the brains of the operation. We are the voice, but not the brain.
That's right.
All right, let's get down to business. How did we leave Jaime Lannister? So last we saw of Jaime, he was heading from Riverrun with Brienne of Tarth and Ser Cleos Frey. He'd been freed from bondage by Catelyn Stark in the hopes that she might get Sansa and Arya back in return. The forces of Riverrun and Harrenhal, via Roose Bolton, are out looking for them, but thanks to some heroics by Brienne, they evaded capture. For now. Mackelly, why don't we give the summary of this one?
All right. Brienne, Jaime, and Cleos are about halfway between Riverrun and the confluence of the red, green, and blue forks of the Trident when they spot an inn. There's no lights and no smoke in the chimneys, but the prospect of a roof, a bed, and maybe some food is very tempting. Ser Cleos said that he stayed there on one of his journeys to and from King's Landing, and the beer was good. Brienne steers their boat to the dock, apparently influenced by Cleos's beer recommendations, I guess. The side shows that this is the Inn of the Kneeling Man, supposedly at the site where Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. Jaime likes the symbolism.
They hear a horse in the stable. Jaime opens the door to the inn. A lad with a drawn crossbow stops him in his tracks. The boy asks them which side they're on, but Brienne explains that they're here to buy food and shelter, not to look for trouble. Brienne and Cleos disarm, and, noticing the Tully sail on their boat, the kid lowers the crossbow. A man joins from the cellar, saying that they have horse meat. He explained that he and his wife found the proprietors murdered and took over the place. He likes the jingle of Brienne's purse and sends the boy to find onions.
Blah. Worst food ever.
We had fried onions the other night with dinner, and it was so good. Oh my goodness.
I couldn't even be in the house with that smell.
We had fake sausage, mashed potatoes, and fried onions. It was so good.
I'm good with the first two. I couldn't do the third. Anyway, they eat relatively well, and the man asks about Riverrun. Cleos provides the status. Hoster's fading. Edmure winning battles at the ford. He also volunteers their destination, and the man warns them to avoid the King's Road. Brienne says she hopes to stay on the river as far as Maidenpool, and from there take the road via Duskendale and Rosby. Nope, says the man. The river is blocked a few miles downstream by 2 burned boats. He also warns them of the general banditry in the region. The Lightning Lord, Beric Dondarrion, attacks any he sees, along with his sidekick Thoros of Myr. Jaime recalls Thoros as the only man who could drink toe-to-toe with Robert Baratheon. Also a Red Priest of R'hllor, primarily so that his red robes hide the wine stains.
Overland it will have to be. The inn has 3 horses, but they're not for sale at any price. Oh, a gold dragon per horse, you say? And you'll throw in the skiff. They're yours. The innkeeper has very specific instructions for how to avoid outlaws. Jaime is suspicious. There's too much horse manure on the floor for just 3 horses, and he suspects that a trap awaits them. Brienne wants to get moving now. There'll be a bright enough moon. In order to ride the horse, Jaime's leg irons have to be broken, but she keeps his hands bound. When they leave, she quickly does the opposite of what the man advised, and Jaime is impressed.
They circumvent a watchtower by heading cross-country before returning to the road. As the night wears on, they all droop in the saddle, and she calls a halt. She takes first watch, and Cleos falls asleep. Jaime chats with Brienne, who asks him why he ever became a Kingsguard. He avoids the true answer, that he and Cersei devised a plan to be together in King's Landing, where she lived in the Tower of the Hand. Their father wouldn't be able to stop it, and they'd be together. Jaime was called to the tourney at Harrenhal, where he was invested as a Kingsguard. But they'd miscalculated Tywin's fury. He quit as Hand of the King on a thin pretense and went back to Casterly Rock with Cersei. They'd just succeeded in only swapping places.
Brienne presses him, and he tells her heiress. She concedes that the king was rotten and mad, but he was King's guard. But Jaime fires back that Catelyn paid her, Brienne, to murder Renly. That touches a nerve, and Jaime is alert to the chance of escape, but Brienne stays out of reach. She has a reverence for both knighthood and being a Kingsguard, and feels he soiled them both by his action. But he fires back that he earned both. He was knighted on the battlefield by Sir Arthur Dane himself, and it was Aerys' white cloak that soiled him.
Jaime curls up to sleep, hoping to dream of Cersei, but instead it's Aerys. The king sees Jaime with blood on his hands and demands to know whether it's Tywin's. Nope, it's Aerys' Hand of the King, Rosart the Pyromancer. Aerys soils himself when he realizes what this means, and with a single slash across the throat, Jaime dispatches the tyrant. He didn't want to get caught, but Sir Ellis Westerling and Lord Crakehall entered the throne room and saw him. They announce that the city has fallen. He tells them to announce that the king is dead.
They ask if they should proclaim a new king, but Jaime tells them to announce whoever they like. He plonks down on the Iron Throne and waits to see who would come to claim it. It was, as we know, Ned Stark, claiming it not for himself, but for his brother-in-arms, Robert. And Jaime is still bitter that the Northmen judged him for his actions.
Okay.
Whenever there's the talk of the Kingslayer, I am always... It seems strange. It feels like the last few chapters, all I've done is argue the point of view of the bad guy. Because I was very much sympathising with Melisandre against Davos last time. And this time I'm very much sympathising with the Kingslayer. Because what he did, it just makes perfect sense. Sure, he broke a vow to do it, but vows... Everyone breaks vows from time to time.
Right,
you know?
yeah.
And sometimes for good reasons. And he, above almost anyone else, had a good reason to do it.
Yeah, and we'll get into it further later on, but it's definitely something to discuss, the fact that he does not ever try and defend himself with the truth of what was going on. He never, so far through this story, he never says, yeah, but, well, let me tell you about this, and maybe you'll understand why I did it. So, and I just wondered if maybe he used to do that in his younger days and just decided, nope, people are going to think what they're going to think, and I'm just going to let them think it.
So compared to his first chapter, this one is kind of slow moving. I mean, his first chapter, if you remember, was action-packed with Brienne dancing across the cliff faces like Indiana Jones.
Right.
You know,
doing some parkour moves.
Right. This is much more of a sort of rumination on the past and how he became a Kingsguard and how he became a Kingslayer.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a different, very different vibe in this chapter.
Yeah.
It's also kind of ironic that they stay at the place here. Most of the scene, this chapter takes place at the location supposedly where a northern king bent the knee to the king of Westeros. as this currently is a war between the kings of those same kingdoms.
Right.
So, yeah, and Jaime picks up on the irony. He says, couldn't have picked a better inn than the Inn of the Kneeling Man, because his side is the side that won the battle back then. Or, well, there wasn't a battle, I guess, technically.
We'll be right back.
Hello, friends. Are you ready to make some unforgettable memories? Well, if so, consider the Marriott Bonvoy program. Discover the perfect destination for your summer getaway and unlock exclusive deals on luxurious accommodations. With our affiliate partnership, you'll enjoy unbeatable savings and a seamless booking experience. Don't let summer slip away. Visit Marriott Bonvoy today and make this vacation season one for the books. Use our Ghosts of Harrenhal affiliate page to check it all out and buy Bonvoy points or give some as a gift. The link to our page is in the show notes.
Right. Although there weren't really sides either. I mean, it was just Aegon and the people who had capitulated to Aegon.
Right.
Really, they weren't exactly fighting for him. They were just like, "Well, I'm on his team now."
Yeah. He's got dragons.
He's got dragons. So we're seeing more examples of the sort of devastation of the Riverlands, if the pseudo innkeeper's story is to be believed.
Right.
That he found the inn damaged, and, well, not the building wasn't damaged, but the innkeeper and his wife were murdered, and they buried them out the back. Again, the small folk getting hit hardest by the war.
Yep. Yeah, he mentions that both of his sons, he's got a boy with him in this chapter, and Cleos, I think, asks, is that your son? And he said, no, it's just a boy that my wife and I picked up along the way. We did have two sons. One was killed by lions, as he put it, and I don't think he means in the literal sense. And one was killed by a flux, and that the boy's mother was killed by the bloody mummers. So they they kind of brought him into the fold to help protect each other.
Remember the fact that this man's son was killed by lions, Lannisters, when we get to pedantry.
Okay, all right. I know you've added new pedantry since I last looked, so I'm excited to see what you've got. But, I was thinking the flux is likely due to poor conditions in the area, spreading diseases. Things are probably pretty poor conditions in the Riverlands from what we've seen. Probably a lot of tainted water and things of that nature. And if the mother of this boy, her death was at the hands of the bloody mummers, it was probably pretty horrible, because they seem like pretty horrible people. So, and even at this, who knows what we can take for granted out of this guy's mouth, and what is just, things he's saying to elicit a certain reaction or response from the trio.
When he says his horses aren't for sale, for instance.
Yes, I was going to say, if we really believe, there's a moment where he considers not taking a gold dragon per horse. And, if we believe that he actually was having this internal struggle because he says, I can't ride a golden dragon if I need to escape. Society has broken down so much in the Riverlands that the innkeep is considering, or at least pretending to consider, turning down an exorbitant amount of money for 3 horses and some food. And then, his reason is he can't ride away on it. So in this area, goods are worth more than a significant amount more of coins.
Mackelly, just to create a comparison for you, I know that you're uniquely prepared for the zombie apocalypse.
I am.
I'm assuming you don't have stashes of cash lying around for that day, because they won't be very useful.
That's a good point. I don't have stashes of cash lying around for multiple reasons. I wish I had stashes of cash lying around. But yes, I take your point.
The new innkeeper says that the previous innkeeper was killed likely by wolves or lions. What's the difference? He says to stay well clear of the King's Road. It's worse than bad. There's wolves, lions, both, and bands of broken men preying on anyone that they catch. So his take on it all is pretty nihilistic, but I mean, I would imagine from the small folks' perspective, that makes a lot of sense. There's nobody's riding through like a conquering hero here. Well, they may ride through like a conquering hero, but then they treat the small folk just like the previous occupants.
Yes, that does seem to be the case. It definitely says something because their Lord Paramount, Hoster Tully, has sworn fealty to the king in the north. So you would think if the small folk cared about such things, they would rally behind Robb Stark and his wolves, as they call them.
Yeah.
But he lumped them right in with the Lions and the Bloody Mummers and the Brotherhood Without Banners.
It could be ignorance. I mean, it could be that they were not... that it's never been the Wolves. I mean, to me, it feels like they're still pretty close to Riverrun. If Robb's forces were pillaging this close to Riverrun, then society really has broken down. I mean, you're claiming to be... You know, you've come to rescue the Riverlands.
Right.
And you're pillaging inns 50 miles downriver from Riverrun. It feels like nothing sacred at that point.
That's true. It sounds a bit like Roos's decision to have the Bloody Mummers hunt Lannister loyalists, I'm putting in quotes, probably led to the deaths of a lot of innocent people who helped those lions, the Lannisters, because they had no choice. All this done in the name of King Robb. And that plan is not exactly winning many loyalists within the small folks.
I agree with that, but it feels like we're still a lot closer to Riverrun than we are to Harrenhal. Maybe I have misread the map here, but it feels like this would be beyond the scope of what Roose and his Bloody Mummers are up to now. Mm-hmm. When the Bloody Mummers were working with the Lannisters, yes, they might have reached this far, but it does feel like this should still be under the auspices of Edmure and the northern forces based in Riverrun to me.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a bit closer to Riverrun than Harrenhal, than it is to Harrenhal. So, yeah, I guess it just depends on how far out these Bloody Mummers are roaming.
Yeah.
So, the innkeep mentions a few times about his wife who, as he puts it, isn't here. He doesn't say where she is. He doesn't say when she'll be back or why she left, just isn't here. And that's fine, I guess, but it is a bit suspicious how defensive he gets. Cleos asks, where is your wife? And he says, and what would you be wanting to know that for?
I have another take on that, though. I mean, it definitely depends how you say it. If Ser Cleos said it in tones like, where is your wife?
Yes.
Then I might, like the innkeeper, say, why do you want to know?
Right.
Not because I'm being defensive about anything, simply because I wouldn't want these three armed people to know of where my wife
it's
was.
very possible he's hidden her down in the cellar because he doesn't know who these people are. And you can definitely understand him being distrusting in times like these, but there's just enough going on with him and the situation at this inn that her absence feels suspicious to me.
Yeah, and I think if you think of him as being part of a plot to capture these guys, you know, to set a trap for these travelers and rob the horses back from them, what have you, the presence of a wife, even if only in mention, is reassuring.
Yes.
These two don't see the two of them together seem like a couple of desperados, but if there's a wife in the picture, it feels like, oh, it's kind of like a family unit of some sort.
It's a more wholesome vibe going on.
Right.
Yeah, so it definitely would make sense that he might have a cover story involving a wife to try and look more innocent and wholesome. But there's definitely some things that don't add up. Like we mentioned in the summary, there's only 3 horses in the stable, but Jaime notices there's a whole lot of horse manure everywhere in the stable. Way more than what would be produced by these 3 horses.
We'll be right back.
This episode is sponsored by Audible. To get a free audiobook, or 2 if you're an Amazon Prime member, go to our exclusive URL, audibletrial.com/ghostsharrenhal. You can find the link in our show notes.
Yeah, although if you never clean the stables, even 3 horses will eventually start to make a huge...
That's true. Yeah, that's true. And Jaime right before they leave, he says to Brienne, "Yeah, let's get out of here. There's too much horse manure in this stable.
Right.
for my liking. I'm afraid I don't want to step in it. And he gives her a look like, are you picking up what I'm putting down here? So he's definitely feeling some sort of spider sense tingling here.
The man admits to not being the original owner of the inn, and says that he buried the proprietor out back. Why would he say this? I mean, I think on one level you might say it because if you can't serve beer and cook a meal for these people, you might look suspicious.
Okay.
How has the innkeeper forgotten these things?
Sure.
So he might just be telling the truth, like, I stumbled upon this place, I'm not the proprietor.
Right. Full disclosure here. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, that's possible.
If you're lying, it's better not to lie too many times because you'll get sort of like swept up in it,
Yeah, that's true.
Keep the lies simple.
I imagine if he didn't say anything, they probably would not have noticed, except for maybe he wouldn't know where things are that he should probably know where they are. Right. Things like that.
And for instance, the real innkeeper would sweep out the stables.
Oh, yes. Good point. But it does seem pretty clear that both Jaime and Brienne are picking up on the dangerous nature of this situation. Cleos, on the other hand, not so much.
Oh, yeah. Cleos is hopeless. He doesn't know. He's like I would be. But there's a bed. There's a bed. I want to sleep here.
I'm sleepy. Jaime first, when the chapter opened, Jaime announced that he would like to stay at this inn. He would like to, lay his head on a pillow and sleep on a bed. And later, Cleos wants to stay when the innkeep, who's not an innkeep, says, well, you'll be wanting to stay here. And Cleos is all in favor of it. And Jaime said, no, it's time to go. And Cleos is like, but I thought you're the one that originally said you wanted to stay here. And Jaime says, that was when I thought the place was empty.
So even though it is dangerous, he does feel safer to be out in the middle of the night on an unfamiliar horse, unfamiliar roads.
Right.
That's safer than staying there, which makes a lot of sense. Especially, I think, when the innkeep is so curious and sort of like trying to lead them on the path out of here. It just feels like he's urging them into a trap.
Yes, right. And I think Martin creates some really fun, stressful tension in this chapter because none of the events and dialogue on its own is particularly damning, but altogether just gives a vibe of some possible shady business going on here that, two of the three members of our party are picking up on.
Yeah. But some of what he's saying is probably true. I mean, certainly the route they were planning to take downriver to the Ruby Ford, and then you've got to imagine that some of those places are going to be very well populated by one side or the other, and everybody's looking for these guys now. It's not like It's not like you have any friends. It's just the three of you, basically.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he mentions the innkeep, who's not an innkeep, mentions that there's soldiers at the Ruby Ford, and there's broken men laying in wait at various locations. He mentions a boat that was mentioned in the summary. I believe you mentioned the boat. There's a couple boats in the summary that are burned out, and silt is building up along them. And so it's hard to sail past them, and that there are brigands waiting at these boats. And just to clear things up, the boats that are jamming the river here, those couldn't be the boats that went up river from the Battle of the Blackwater, because the Blackwater does not connect to the Trident. So if you're thinking, I wonder if those could be those boats, they would have had to carry them across land in order to do it, which seems quite unlikely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we do get the vibe that Beric Dondarrion, who has been a sort of like a constant backdrop to a lot of what's going on in the Riverlands, that his band of men might be turning a little bit rogue, that they are attacking random people. But again, this innkeeper is small folk and not very well informed, and probably picking up a lot of rumors and extrapolating from very small amounts of information.
Yeah, one of the things he says is that when they say we're going to King's Landing, he says, I've heard Stannis has 100,000 men and he's at the walls of the city, which we know is not the case. So yes, he's certainly probably picking up various bits of info that he's hearing. But, some things about Dondarrion. He was sent originally by Ned to, as we keep saying, desummit the mountain after the Lannisters' unprovoked attack on the Riverland towns. Since then, Ned and Robert have died, and Tywin is now Hand of the King, who's the one that theoretically ordered the mountain to make these attacks. So he very easily could have disbanded and gone home, but instead he's been harassing primarily the Lannister forces.
Yeah, it does seem like he's sort of like got into this habit and he doesn't want to break it. He's sort of enjoying the sort of being and I mean, he certainly came with authority. He had permission and a mission.
Right. But
now it's what is he still doing? Is he actually still chasing the mountain?
Right.
Or is he just trying to be sort of like a Robin Hood type figure?
Exactly. And the innkeep says that he's called the Lightning Lord because he strikes so suddenly, but of course it's probably called the Lightning Lord because his sigil is a lightning bolt. That might have something to do with why he's called that. Not so much because he strikes so suddenly. But he also mentions that there's rumor that Beric Dondarrion can't be killed. So there's still these odd rumors about him being dead or alive. And basically, since he's left King's Landing, we've heard Beric Dondarrion's dead. No, he's alive. No, he's dead. No, he's alive. And there is definitely something... and you just don't normally hear this kind of thing about people. They're either dead or alive.
Typically, yes.
But also the Bloody Mummers get a mention here that they're out and about. And I think if I had to choose one group to run into, I would choose Beric Dondarrion and his men over the Bloody Mummers.
Yes, I'll take my chances with the Robin Hood character over
yes.
Who are the Bloody Mummers working for now? Are they working for Roose Bolton now?
They are, theoretically, yes.
Right.
But they're a pretty ruthless band. So
yes. I mean, working for Tywin Lannister, working for Roose Bolton, it's pretty much the same to the small folk, I would think.
Right. But real quick, before we move on, I just wanted... So, the Inn of the Kneeling Man's location is basically at the northernmost point of the Red Fork. And from here, it turns south until it merges... kind of southeast until it merges with the blue and green forks of the Trident. And then it spills into the Bay of Crabs at a town called Salt Pans. So the inn is like slightly less than halfway to Salt Pans from River Run. You could certainly understand Brienne's plan.
Oh yeah, her plan made a lot of sense if you could get through all of these choke points.
Right, but like you were saying earlier, the problem is they're going to run into... And if they stay on the Trident, they're going to go right past the Ruby Ford, right past Derry, all these places where we know that there's going to be soldiers. So you'd have to think they had a backup plan of going over land if this turned out to not be feasible.
Yeah. Now they've got 3 horses, that makes life a little bit easier for the overland crossing.
And speaking of things on her path, she wants to go to take the river all the way to Maidenpool and then ride through Duskendale. And I think she said Rosby? Duskendale, on her way to King's Landing. And she thinks that should keep us out of the war-torn, the heaviest fighting. But we know, because we were with Arya when Roose Bolton mentioned it, that war is on the way to Duskendale because he sent Robert Glover and Helmut Tallhart there to basically just take the fight to that area because it was untouched to this point. Didn't really make a lot of sense. So she might, even if they went the way she had hoped to go, they might not have avoided the fighting.
So Jaime and Brienne are still not exactly bosom buddies. Jaime spends a lot of the chapter still thinking about ways to kill her, or at least abandon her, which I still find a little bit strange because she is literally taking him home.
Right. They have the same goal.
Right. It's like, what have you gained? I mean, apart from, I guess if he could get rid of her before he got to King's Landing, he could say he escaped and suggest a different kind of outcome than this. Maybe. And then he maybe wouldn't feel the responsibility to release Sansa and Arya.
Yeah.
As it is, it's like, you're safer with her than without her.
Right, you might as well. She's clearly handy in a fight.
Right.
So why are you always trying to kill her and or run away from her?
Right.
He has, throughout this chapter, multiple times, he's thinking about ways to kill her or escape her. And, you know, is it realistic to think that he wants to escape her because he doesn't want to honor his deal with Cat to give up the Stark girls? I mean, what's it to him, really?
Right. Yeah, yes, it might not be strategically great for the Lannisters to give up the Stark girls, but that's not his problem.
No.
His problem is to report, I was released in return for the Stark girls. If you say no, you say no, but that's why I was released.
Right.
It's on your conscience now, I've told you.
Right. Yes, I'm with you entirely on that.
Yeah. So Jaime compares Bree to Tyrion, which is interesting. I mean, they're obviously very physically different, but they are similarly outcasts and scorned by their families to a certain extent.
And by society in a lot of...
Certainly by society, yeah. Yeah, I don't think Brienne has it as bad as Tyrion. I think she's loved by her father, I think her father wanted a son.
Yes, that seems very possible. The comparison makes some sense. I mean, obviously, they've got size, gender, and strength differences. But like you said, they both definitely, we've seen it, face mockery and rumors about them. And, you know, they aren't exactly embraced by society because they're different than the norm. But, you know, I was thinking about that comparison. There's a few other characters you could compare her to, including the other Lannister sibling who doesn't get a mention here, and that's Cersei. Because Brienne almost calls herself her father's only son, and she stops herself short.
Yes.
And, you know, you remember back when Cersei got drunk in the Queen's ballroom during the Battle of the Blackwater, she wished she had been born a man. And she, of course, was going on about how pathetic she thought the average woman is. And I don't think Brienne thinks that way. But they do both seem to wish they were born men.
Yes, that's a good point.
And then the other person I was thinking of is she has some things in common with the Hound, because they've both been members of a King Guard, Royal King's Guard. Hers was called the Rainbow Guard, but it was this to defend a king. But they're both also not knights, which is pretty rare for a King's Guard member. But they're not knights for very different reasons.
Right. She would love to be.
Yes, the Hound hates the hypocrisy of knighthood, mostly due to his vile older brother, Gregor. Whereas she cherishes the idea of knighthood and sacred vows and all the honors that are attached to it, yet because she's a woman, it seems unlikely that she'll, be knighted. Okay, so it's not been explicitly mentioned, so we have to kind of dance around what Aerys and Rosart had planned if the city were to fall, the city being King's Landing. Although it does seem pretty obvious by all the bits of information we've gotten to this point. But we'll refrain from saying exactly what the plan was.
Remind me of the clues, Mackelly.
Okay, well, so Halene the Pyromancer...
The current pyromancer.
Yes, the current pyromancer told Tyrion that they found caches of wildfire in various places under the city. I think he specifically mentioned the Dragon Pit. And we also, in this chapter, Jaime mentions that the previous Hand of the King, Carlton Chelstead, was dipped in wildfire and burned alive, and that lowly Rosart, the pyromancer, was promoted for his shared love of fire with Aerys. And at the end in that same area of this chapter, Aerys says Rosart went to give the incoming force a warm welcome. So, certainly you can make some conjectures.
Yeah.
And
I think they were going to use wildfire in some way.
In some way. I think you might be onto something. We haven't done the best job of protecting this plot point, so apologies for that, but...
it happened in the past. It happened before the book started, you know.
Yes.
That's history at this point.
I agree. The only reason that I even bring this up at all is because there's still the tiniest bit of mystery shrouding why Jaime killed Aerys.
But knowing this plot point, it does make you even more puzzled as to why Jaime is so coy about what he did.
Yep, exactly.
It makes very little sense, but anyway.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And clearly, based on everything we've said, there's certainly enough to understand that there's more than meets the eye to Jaime killing his king. He didn't just, in a vacuum, decide to break his vow and kill his king. And, you know, Brienne wasn't there, and only we hear his thoughts on what Rosart was going to do.
That's true. It was, as I wrote the notes after my first read through of this, I had it that he told Brienne all this, but that's not true.
Right.
He has a conversation with Brienne, and then he has a dream in which he has this whole extra bit with Rosa and Aerys.
Right. He does not say to her his, this piece about Rosart that would be very helpful to her to understand what he was doing, why he chose to kill her. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this, when I said that he just doesn't explain himself. He doesn't seem to like when people call him Kingslayer, but he never explains, like, well, let me tell you why, and maybe you'll understand. And, if you think about it, Brienne and Jaime handle accusations of kingslaying in very different ways, because Jaime in this point says, well, we're both kingslayers.
Right.
And unlike Jaime, who refuses to make excuses and explain himself, and just seems to let other people slander him, Brienne explains why the title of Kingslayer is completely unjust, and all the way down to mentioning the shadow assassin, which, is a hard one to swallow. It'd be a lot easier to swallow. I killed King Aerys because he was about to do something dangerous with wildfire than I didn't kill Renly. It was a shadow assassin that did it.
Jaime's quite funny when he says, I wish I'd thought of that.
Right. Why didn't I think of that sooner? So
we discovered that Jaime, and he does not tell Brienne this. This is internal monologue.
Right.
That Jaime was persuaded into taking the White by his sister. He balked at it. He said, no, but what about Casterly Rock? And she then asks, do you want the rock or do you want me? And he chose her, but the plan backfired.
It did, yes. It sure did.
And the plan was good in many ways, because they figured that Tywin couldn't say no. When Aerys asked for Jaime to be a Kingsguard, Tywin was unable to say no. Right. So it came to pass. And therefore, Cersei, living with Tywin in the Tower of the Hand, would have access to Jaime all the time, and they could live happily ever after. What they misunderstood was how furious Tywin would be that this was done to him. And we don't even know if he has any awareness of the fact that it was Cersei and Jaime doing it. He probably thinks it was just Aerys, proving that he could do whatever he wanted to, right, including robbing Casterly Rock of its heir.
Yes. Exactly.
And so Tywin quit as Hand of the King. Not immediately, but soon enough where there was no doubt why, and took Cersei back to Casterly Rock, which is, of course, a complete disaster for them. Yep. It did make me wonder, and I don't know if this is me forgetting, but was Cersei excited to marry Robert because it would take her back to King's Landing?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say excited to marry King Robert, but I will say that we will find out at some point that she wasn't exactly broken up about the prospect of another royal marriage that Tywin was planning. Yet, the prospect of Jaime wedding Lysa Tully was just too much for her to bear. So, her marrying someone, that was fine. Him marrying someone, that was not acceptable. And so, she convinces Jaime to give up the right to becoming the Lord of Casterly Rock eventually, and depriving her father of his preferred heir, just to keep Jaime near her, even though she fully expected to be married to someone at some point here. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty huge sacrifice by Jaime for the love of Cersei.
Yeah, it was. I think they mentioned that they thought that Elia Martell might not live. They thought she was sickly.
Yes, hoping she might die in childbirth.
Right, and so then the Tywin's plan was to marry Cersei to Rhaegar.
That's what he's thinking. That's his thoughts. We will get more information as the story goes on about how all this played out. But like you said, it must have been looking really bad for Jaime at one point there, because for a while he's stuck as a Kingsguard for a mad king in King's Landing. His father is furious, and Cersei's been shipped back to Casterly Rock. So they got really nothing out of it.
Right. So I mean, his only sort of like thing to look forward to is Elia Martell dying in childbirth.
Right.
But now there's no guarantee that Tywin would want Cersei to marry Rhaegar. Probably still yes, because he was ambitious, but he might have been in such a snit that he wouldn't have allowed that to happen.
True. Yeah, true. You feel like there's some flawed logic to the plan for Jaime to take the White, because Tywin could have ended up marrying her off to someone not in the Red Keep, and then they would really never have seen each other much at all.
Yeah.
I mean, with Rhaegar married, Viserys was the only option in King's Landing, so maybe she dodged a bullet there. But but Viserys, even if she had been married off to Viserys, he was eventually going to be named Prince of Dragonstone when Rhaegar took over the Iron Throne, and then they'd have been off to Dragonstone possibly.
Well, that's not strictly true, is it? Because by that point, Rhaegar had a son.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
Was that son an Aegon?
Yeah. That's
so
true.
that Aegon would have been the natural Lord of Dragonstone.
Yeah, well, although at this point, Aegon might not have been born yet, because Ilya is pregnant. We don't know whether it's with her first child or second child.
Well, he was the second child, right?
Yes, right. Good point.
So
yes.
He wasn't born, yes, regardless. Yes, you're right. Good point, yeah. Well, definitely choose baby Aegon over Viserys. I don't care who he was.
Even the age gap and all. I found it kind of surprising to learn that Jaime and Cersei spent 4 years living apart from age 11 to 15, which is basically from age 11, when Jaime went off to Squire with Sumner Crakehall, and until the end of Robert's Rebellion, they basically were apart for those 4 years, because Jaime was squiring, as he mentions, for 4 years until he earned his knighthood fighting in the against the Kingswood Brotherhood, and Cersei was in King's Landing from the time she was 12 until Jaime took the White, in which case they did a switcheroo. So yeah. I believe my math adds up to 4 years there.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is, I mean, not to sort of like probe into why incest happens, but you could sort of imagine incest happening with two siblings who are very close and who sort of sleep in the same bed, and they grow older until it becomes a little bit too old, by which time they've already sort of like taken the next step kind of thing.
Right, sure.
But what we're hearing here is kind of like, well, actually in those formative years they were apart.
Right.
They were together as children, then they were apart for the teenage years when they might have done that kind of experimentation. So they were old enough to know better when they got back together again, to be honest.
Sure, yeah.
But then the flip side of that, of course, is Jaime, when she arrives in King's Landing, Jaime's tapping his foot like, remember why I joined this?
True. That's probably true.
We talked about the hands that followed Tywin previously, and the last of those was Rossa the Pyromancer, and Jaime mentions that he killed him before he killed Aerys, and Aerys was hoping that the blood on his hands was Tywin's blood, right? That's who Aerys wanted. But,
yes.
Aerys knew the gig was up when Jaime said, no, that's Rossa, that's, by implication, you're next.
Right, yes. Yeah, so he mentions the previous Hand of the Kings. Basically, he mentions that he remembers they came and went so fast he remembers their sigils more than he remembers their names. So Here's what I remember about the previous hands of the king. First of all, the thin pretext that Jaime mentions that Tywin resigned under, I believe was just illness of some sort, if I remember correctly. But there was some bad blood that had developed between king and hand at this point, beyond just the king taking the heir to Casterly Rock away from Tywin. And so I doubt that Aerys fought all that hard over the loss. Remember, he mentions in this chapter that Ilian Payne, the king, had his tongue cut out. Anyway, so there was bad blood between them. So, probably didn't fight all that hard to prevent him from leaving. But the hands, as I remember, the order it goes in, Horn a Plenty hand, which is the first one after Tywin, was actually Owen Merryweather, and he was the one that was unable to prevent Robert's rebellion and therefore exiled and lost his lands and titles. And his Horn a Plenty was his sigil looks like a cornucopia, basically. And then the Dancing Griffin's hand was John Connington, who was a friend of Rhaegar's. And he promised to deliver Robert's head. And that's a big promise. Young people should know, under-promise, over-deliver. You start with that as a promise. That's quite the delivery you got to live up to.
But if you say, I'll increase tax revenue by 2%, you might not get the job as Hand of the King.
It's true. He did have to really sell it, possibly. But instead, John Connington lost a battle at Stony Sept and was exiled and lost his lands and titles. And his sigil was pretty much like Jaime mentions, Dancing Griffins.
Right.
And then Mace and Dagger hand is Carlton Chelstead. We just mentioned him a little bit ago. He was promoted from Master of Coin to Hand of the King after John Connington was exiled. And he didn't agree with Rosart's and Aerys' love of fire, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Jaime mentions all this in the chapter, this part here. So he was dipped in wildfire and burned alive. So that's rough. His sigil is basically a vertical mace and a horizontal dagger crossing it. So that's the mace and dagger hand. And then Rosart we get a description of. But I'll add that Jaime thinks to himself that nobody ever asked who killed Rosart. And he thinks, he was just some lowly pyromancer. Nobody cares about him.
Yeah. On the day the king gets murdered.
Right.
Pyromancer's death, yeah.
But since the maesters at the Citadel didn't know anything about what Aerys and Rosart were possibly cooking up, it's recorded in the history books that Rosart was killed while attempting to flee the castle, and there's no speculation on who killed him.
Okay.
Just that he died fleeing the castle. That's what I recall about all that, anyway.
So, Jaime, recalling his final conversation with Aerys, even in the dream, it is slightly strange that his dream doesn't even have his true justification for this.
Right, yeah.
In the dream, it's sort of, the justification he kind of gives himself in the dream is that Aerys wanted his father dead. But I would have thought that wouldn't really affect Jaime that much. I mean, he wouldn't do it, perhaps, but...
Right.
I don't think there's a lot of love there, is there?
Well, the thing is he already stopped Rosart from the task that Aerys sent him on. So, and he had to have known the Lannister soldiers would be there at any moment. So he could have spared Aerys and let Ned, Tywin, Robert deal with him in the fallout.
Yeah.
Although killing Aerys probably did help end much of the Targaryen loyalists' desire to fight. Probably helped end the war faster.
Right. True enough.
But yes, it is unclear in his dream whether he killed Aerys because Aerys says to him, "Is that Tywin's blood? I want you to kill him."
Right.
So that's left unclear.
Yeah. Do you have some background for us?
I do. Well, Sir Harlan Grandison gets a mention in this chapter. He was the member of the Royal Kingsguard whose death made room for young Jaime Lannister made a spot for him on the Kingsguard. Harlan, died in his sleep, as Jaime mentions in this chapter. And he obviously definitely served Aerys II, but as he's referred to as old Sir Harlan Grandison, you'd also imagine he served at least Aerys' father Jaehaerys II, or else he was sworn in as a pretty old knight. Doesn't seem likely. It seems he's from House Grandison. There is a House Grandison. The Grandisons hail from the Stormlands with fealty to the Baratheons of Storm's End, and their seat is Grandview. And again, as Jaime mentioned, their sigil is a sleeping black lion on a yellow field. Their words are thought to be, "Rouse me not." And the current head of the house is Lord Hugh Grandison, who himself is no spring chicken in present time. But exactly how Sir Harlan of the Kingsguard fits into the house is unclear.
A comparison with the television show, I wrote some notes here, and then from the conversation that we've had earlier, I realised that some of this is distinct spoiler. So I'm going to have to wing this as I go now. The conversation about kingslaying is much delayed. It comes at a much later point in Game of Thrones than it did in the book. And is the true story, is the complete story.
Oh, okay.
So which as you can see on screen now, Mackelly, you can read for yourself all the spoilers that I'm not about to give. Yes? But he does pose. So he gives the true story, and basically Brienne looks sort of horrified, and you can see she's absolving him of his crime as she hears it, because you would, because it makes sense. And at one point he poses to her, "Would you have kept your vow if you'd been told to kill your father and do this other stuff?" And she has no answer to that. So, but none of it happens now. And again, it's just the two of them, and they just do some verbal jousting as they walk along. That's kind of all they do at this part of the actual story.
I will say this: what you described does happen later in the book.
In the books, yes, that's what I inferred from what you were saying earlier, that this was still to come. So I decided to not say it because it would become a spoiler. Yeah. Pedantry corner. You know, there's nothing I love more. I mean, there's nothing I love more than pedantry, but there's nothing I love more than astronomical pedantry.
I know. I could feel your excitement.
Thank you, George Martin. So when they head by horse and they don't take the route that the innkeeper told them to take, and instead they go to the watchtower that they were told to avoid, well, they go around that watchtower, they keep going further south, they get tired, they decide to camp for the night. At that point, they say that half the night was over.
Right.
And then they say that the half moon was overhead.
Yes, I recall.
No. That's not how it works.
Tell us how it does work.
Well, if you've got a half moon, then the sun and moon need to be in a certain alignment. So when the night is half over, the sun should be right on the opposite side of the world, right?
Right, sure, yeah.
So if the moon was overhead, it would be a full moon.
Oh.
The only way for a moon to be a half moon at the middle of the night is for it to be rising or setting. Those are the only two ways you could have a half moon. You couldn't have it overhead at the middle of the night.
Okay.
Doesn't make any sense.
Huh. I like it.
And then the others are a little bit less. I mean, that one just fills me with joy. The other ones are less good, but the would-be innkeeper reckons that the former occupant was murdered by wolves or maybe lions. Okay, so sure, he doesn't know, but again, I think these are Rob's forces, and are they that far from discipline that they would actually do this? I mean, again, he doesn't know. But the reason this makes this pedantry is that later on we learned that his own son was murdered by Lannisters, or lions as he calls them, right?
Right, yeah.
Wouldn't you, from that point onwards in your life, pretty much blame the Lannisters for everything?
You would think so.
I mean, he's blaming the Starks first when the Lannisters murdered his child. Or maybe those really nice guys, the Lannisters, who happened to murder my child. It's like, that makes no sense. It's got to be the Lannisters. They did everything wrong from this point forward.
That is a good point.
But he is lying through his teeth, probably. So
Right,
maybe the whole thing is a
possible.
tissue of lies. Maybe this is why they spotted it.
I like it. It's subtle, and I appreciate it.
News and notes.
Not a great deal of news or notes this week. Basically, the whole world of A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones and everything is revolving around the premiere of House of the Dragon, which was just a few days ago. And so there's not a great deal of other news coming out at the moment. But as we mentioned at the top of the show here, we had a lot of fun discussing House of the Dragon with our Buy Me a Coffee sustainers. We always have a fun time talking with them in general, but we had an especially fun time because we had a really cool topic to focus on.
That's true. We could get on a video call with them and just pull a random topic out of a hat, and we'd have fun talking about it.
Right.
But add in the House of the Dragons, and we had a blast. It was great.
We did,
and it's been good for our ratings, right?
It sure has. We've had quite. You've always said since we started this thing that you were waiting for our what you call hockey stick moment.
Yes.
Which is when our numbers chart looks like a hockey stick where it really shoots up. And if you look at our number chart this week, it's looking rather hockey stick like.
Thank you, HBO.
Yes.
We just want to give a quick shout out to one of our listeners, Jenny of Oldstones. She's dealing with some health issues in her family. We want to wish her and her family the very best. She is a hugely important part of our Discord community. She's so fun and positive and enjoyable to interact with, and so we send her good vibes.
Absolutely, yes, that we do.
I'm sure she'll be mortified when she hears that.
I hope not.
All right, let's conclude. Brienne continues to show that she's not as gullible as Jaime hopes she is, because Jaime's determined to kill her for doing him a favour.
She sure does.
She's smelling the same traps and avoiding the same trouble that Jaime would. So, it's sort of like she's going up in his estimation, at least.
Yes, yeah. I think his line was something like, "Well, she's not as dumb as I thought she was," or she might be ugly, but at least she's not half stupid, or something like that.
He's such a charmer.
Oh, yes.
Jaime's accusations that they're both Kingslayers doesn't really land with Brienne, because, of course, she's sure of her own innocence, right?
Right.
And he's absolutely sure of his own guilt. But the question for me is, will she be able to maintain that equanimity if others, let's assume that they, at some point, end this sort of tilting at windmills mission to walk across all of Westeros in chains and somehow avoid capture by all sides. They move back into regular society. This accusation might follow her around, and then can she keep her equanimity the way that Jaime does in the face of it? Even when it's not true, it's going to be very hard for her.
Yes, because like we were saying earlier, she wants to fight the accusation.
Right.
In every instance. Whereas Jaime is just like, I have my reasons.
Yep.
You don't know everything that was happening. And that's pretty much all he ever says.
I slew a king and I could slew someone who calls me the Kingslayer.
Right. Yeah, and Brienne says, I'll kill anyone who calls me a Kingslayer.
Right.
And Jaime's like, well, you might want to start with Cleos then.
Right. Which I'm sure Cleos was like, what?
Wait, did I hear my name just mentioned?
My turn for the watch. Jaime's life seems kind of sad. I mean, he became a Kingsguard for the love of Cersei. I mean, I always thought that he was, I really genuinely thought this, because I'd forgotten all this part of the story, that he really wanted to be Kingsguard, that he
Right.
just loved the sort of martial life and couldn't wait to be a Kingsguard, but he was not duped into it, but went into it for a reason other than to become a Kingsguard, and then was stuck with an awful job.
He was heavily persuaded by his sister. Yeah, and heading overland into the heart of war-torn Riverlands, which seems to be what they're doing right now, is a rather dangerous decision, but as we mentioned, it's justified based on the info about what's coming further up the Red Fork.
It shouldn't be, because this whole area is now controlled by the forces of the Riverlands and the North.
Yes.
But unfortunately, Roose Bolton has hired maniacs to patrol this area.
Yes, and also Rob's men will be looking to find this group and bring Jaime back. So even
True.
if they find friendly foe, they're not friendly in the sense that they will help them along with their mission.
Very true.
Is it possible that they could manage to get through this without incident? I mean,
I think they'll have to do a lot of cross-country travelling to make that happen. But I mean, hey, Arya got as far as Harrenhal. Oh wait, no, she was.
Well, I will say, if they run into trouble, Brienne and Jaime are quite a formidable duo, except for that one of them is in shackles.
True. And the other one has to keep a hand on the other one's shackles the whole time she's fighting, in case he tries to strangle her with them.
I'm not sure Cleos is going to be a whole lot of help in a fight, but,
I think you can be sure.
He is a knight, so,
Yes.
And, you mentioned that Jaime's life seems kind of sad, but I will add that lately his life continues to be improving. He started in a dark cell in a dungeon of Riverrun, and then to freedom in chains, and now he's mounted and his ankle shackles have been removed. So he's really just he's progressing.
Upward trajectory.
Yes, he's trending in the right way for his sake anyway.
Well, one of the reasons our numbers are improving is because you've all left us very positive reviews. If you haven't, please go out and do that. It would help to spread the word yet further.
Absolutely.
You can also buy some merchandise at ghostsofharrenhal.threadless.com, or you can buy us an Arbor Gold at buymeacoffee.com/ghostsharrenhal, or even become a sustainer at the Lord Paramount or Knight of the Realm level. We're very grateful to those who've already done so.
Yes, we certainly do. And of course, you can always reach us at ghost.harrenhal@gmail.com. You can go out and follow us on Twitter at ghostharrenhal. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and YouTube.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.